Good morning, class. I'll be starting the class on limbic system today. It's quite a comprehensive topic, and then there are a lot many topics under subheadings in this topic to be covered. So I'll just show you how to navigate the slides. These slides have already been provided to you for your own reading, and then I'll just highlight the points where you should give emphasis on. So see the term limbic system. So limb, here the limb means ring-like structure, a structure that is forming a ring. It is a collection of nuclei within the brainstem, which is forming a sort of a ring-like structure. Okay, so that's why it is known as a limbic system. So you can see that this particular collection of neurons are composed of two important parts. One, the lobular system. Another is the nuclei. So first, let us discuss the lobes. Before I begin with that, it was evolutionarily known as previously known as rhinencephalon, because it was earlier thought that this particular system was only involved in the process of olfaction. Okay, so previously this system was basically known as rhinencephalon because this system was dedicated for olfaction. That is what they thought before, and there was no other role they thought. But as the science evolved, as we understood the system better, we understood that the function of the system is not only limited to olfaction, but there is so many other roles that can be derived from the system. So we'll just discuss the system today, and then we'll also look at the functions. From the examination point of view, you will be asked what is limbic system, what are the functions of the limbic system. Separately, you may be asked what is the function of amygdala. Sometimes the questions will be asked what is the role of limbic system with respect to memory, what is the role of limbic system with respect to autonomic function control. So this is the outline of the topic that you are supposed to know. That means, first of all, what is limbic system, what are the parts of the limbic system. Next, you are supposed to know the functions broadly. Then you are supposed to know the functions specifically with respect to olfaction, memory, and emotions. These three things you are supposed to know. Okay, you can see that the limbic system was evolutionarily known as rhinencephalon, and it was said to be known as visceral brain. That means the brain which was dedicated for execution of autonomic functions. Earlier simplistic organisms, like those organisms which did not have much higher functions, these organisms, the basic modulus of operation was basically to survive. For survival, the most important thing that we are supposed to have is the flight and fight response. That is the function of the autonomic nervous system. So the part of the brain, or the integration of the brain which was closely integrated with this autonomic nervous system, was known as visceral brain. That means the brain which was basically controlling the important dominant emotions of the animal, which drive the animal towards survival instincts. That is either the fright or the flight response. That means for the organism to survive, it only needs food and reproduction for the next generation. So these are the two important roles for an organism. First of all, it has to survive, it has to get food. That is the primary goal of an organism. The second goal is to pass its genes to the next generation before its own DNA wears out. That means when the organism will grow, and with the course of time, there is denaturation of the DNA. Before the DNA gets denatured and the intrinsic copy of that organism is lost, it has to pass its genes to the next generation, that is via reproduction. So these are the two important functions, flight and fright. Okay, so this is the function of the autonomic system, but the autonomic system has to have some kind of emotional coloring. It has to have some kind of emotional content. So what are the basic emotions? The first is happiness or the reward. Next is aversion or the punishment. And the third is basically, what is the third emotion? Okay, we'll discuss this thing later on, not now. Anyways, this system was closely integrated with the emotional aspect of the autonomic nervous system. How the autonomic nervous system functions as in general, and what are the emotional context to this thing. So limbic system was involved for this thing. Okay, and limbic system is dedicated for this important role. So let us see, there are two terms, limbic lobe and limbic system. So limbic lobe means these are the cortical nuclei of the limbic system. That means the cortex, which is the governing cortex of this particular system, is known as the limbic lobe. And limbic system means it is the integration of the lobe, the various subthalamic nuclei and the interconnections in between. So limbic system is a composite of the cortex, the various nuclei involved and the interconnections in between. So let us discuss one by one. First, let us discuss the limbic cortex. So I have highlighted some of the important points here in the bold. So you are supposed to know, or at least remember those points with more greater importance. Okay, so from the limbic cortex we are supposed to remember the cingulate gyrus, the parahippocampal gyrus and the subcallosal gyrus. These are the three important cortical parts you are supposed to know. See, the ring around the nuclei is basically the cortex. That means the part of the brain, which is separate from the brain stem. So there are some nuclei, small areas you can see in between the diagram. These are the part of the brain stem, and the ring which is being formed around the brain stem is the cortical part, or the actual brain part. So what are the points that you are supposed to know from this cortex? First is the cingulate gyrus. This term you are supposed to remember from the cortical part. That means the limbic cortex, at least one word if you are supposed to remember, then you can say cingulate gyrus. If you can top up, then you can remember parahippocampal gyrus, orbitofrontal cortex and subcallosal gyrus. These are the additional parts. Next part is the subcortical structures. That means these are the structures which are found in the brainstem as dedicated nuclei. So what are the important nuclei that you are supposed to remember? These are marked in bold letters. First, you are supposed to remember the anterior thalamic nuclei. This is the important nuclei in the subcortical structures. Next is hippocampus, then hypothalamus and the amygdala. These are the important key words or the key points that you are supposed to remember. I have supplemented with adequate number of images so that you can form a basic concept, because it is hard as it is to remember the structures by name. So you have to have some kind of spatial memory, some kind of visual memory to support or as a supplement to the particular words. So I have given you adequate amount of information in the form of images. Not all the images are not supposed to be reproduced in the examination. Whichever image suits you, or whichever one particular image suits your imagination, that image you can put in your brain for later recovery or later recuperation. So let us go from the parts once again. From the limbic cortex you are supposed to remember the cingulate gyrus. This is the one part you are supposed to remember, at least minimum. And from the limbic subcortical structures you are supposed to remember, in fact, 4. That is the anterior thalamic nucleus, hippocampus, hypothalamus and amygdala. These are the important parts you are supposed to remember from the subcortical structures. You can review the slide for the image for a special orientation regarding these structures. So what are the functions of the limbic system? As we have discussed before, the first primary function of the limbic system that was discovered was olfaction. Okay, so with respect to the olfaction, we are supposed to know few terms. First, the piriform cortex and the amygdaloid nucleus. These are the three important terms you are supposed to remember. Amygdala in particular is involved in the emotional response to smell. Okay, no wonder why the perfume industry was in such a boom. That means most of these memories that we form Like most of the subtle memories that we form as human beings as of now are related to the sense of smell. No wonder we have some kind of direct emotional stimulus if we are familiar, or if we are getting some kind of a familiar smell or familiar perfume. Okay, it brings back so many good memories. Just like if you are given a biryani or some other food of your choice, then the smell of that food activates or basically starts releasing some sort of emotional response in your body. We have one particular example, as we have known as the Pavlov's dog experiment, if you can remember from that thing. This was a classical conditioning in which the dog was primed with the particular smell of a food, which and this particular memory was associated with the tinkerbell or the sound. So this is something a different chapter altogether, but I can, as you can remember from that particular example, is that the smell of the food can bring back the memory of the food. That means the memory of the food, or the food itself was a reward. It was a rewarding experience for the dog. Even if the dog is not getting the food, at least the smell of that food can bring back some kind of positive reinforcement or positive memory in the mind of the dog. Likewise, for human beings, we have so many emotional connections with respect to any particular perfume or smell. So if we are having some kind of positive association with a good memory, which basically is associated with a good smell, then just the smell of that particular thing or that event can bring back those memories back, and it may be a rewarding instances. So amygdala in this particular section is important, as it becomes, or as it basically colors the emotional response to the smell. Okay, it is also important as a site or dedicated site for pheromone processing. What is pheromone? Pheromones are the chemical substances or the aroma of a particular organism or of a particular animal, which is basically a signal for that opposite gender, for a trigger for mate selection. This is basically a well studied concept in the animals, but the similar concepts can be also stretched into human beings. We'll discuss this thing later on. Besides that, the memory part, which is related to the smell, is processed by the entorhinal cortex. Okay, so this is a diagram given here. So please go to the diagram. I'll not explain the diagram here, but at least you can just have an overview in the flow chart. You can see that the olfactory receptors basically send their axons or the nerve cells to the olfactory bulb, which again sends its information towards the piriform cortex, which is also known as the primary olfactory cortex. This goes into two parts. First for the emotional processing, and next for the memory entrancement. The emotional part is basically handled by the amygdala, while the memory part is handled by the entorhinal cortex. So these are the parts you're supposed to remember with respect to the olfaction. Next, role in memory or role in emotional state. How the emotions are basically derived, or how the emotions are basically processed by the limbic system. First, you can see that the hippocampus, with respect to memory, this word is very important. You're supposed to remember this particular part of the limbic system, that is the hippocampus and the hippocampal formation. Okay, we'll have a elaborate discussion regarding the memory, but I'll just give you an overview here. The next important function is the emotional state, how the emotional state is handled by the limbic system. With respect to emotions, few important terms are also coming, which is clinically relevant. That is the formation of addiction behavior. How the addiction behavior is basically processed. This is something to do with an emotional state. If we have some sort of dependency on a substance, that substance needs to be it has to qualify, first of all, to be a pleasurable experience. Such pleasurable experience is basically rewarding in nature. This reward is basically seen as a positive reinforcement. So this positive reinforcement goes into the long-term memory, and then this positive feedback loop runs in the brain and makes us repeat that kind of activity over and over again. So how the cycle of addiction goes, I've given a flow chart out of which you can see one word: the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus are the parts of the limbic system which basically gives the input of anticipation. That means if some kind of positive good memory was there with respect to some kind of event or to a person, just the thought of that person or that event can bring back some kind of anticipation. That means you will feel happy just thinking about that particular event that is going to happen. This is a anticipatory response. Suppose somebody is planning a date or some kind of romantic evening together, then just the anticipation of that particular event or that particular what is going to happen, that itself, not the event itself, but the anticipation of that event can give some kind of positive reinforcement in the brain. This particular thing is basically processed, or this particular such kind of this impetus is processed by two important regions, that is the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus. Those people who have a highly developed hippocampus and the highly developed prefrontal cortex can anticipate more. That means generally it is seen that those people who have a well-developed hippocampus and a well-developed prefrontal cortex can anticipate and feel happy just by thinking about good things. This particular thing is basically deteriorating, or it deteriorates along with age. That means you will see that some old people, even though some kind of good events are coming or some kind of upcoming good events are there, they don't feel happy just like the young people or the kids. The kids in general are the most happiest. That means whenever an event will come, they will be jumping around, they will be more excited. The excitement part is basically the anticipation. Kids are the most excited people. That means if you tell that you will take the kid to the favorite place or maybe to a Disneyland or some kind of theme park, the adult who is taking that kid to that park will feel happy just by thinking that his kid or her kid will feel happy. But the kid, out of anticipation, is the most happiest because his or her hippocampus in the prefrontal cortex is the more developed, or it is less denatured as compared to the adult. What about the old age people? As we grow old, this particular part of the brain becomes small and small. It shrinks in size. Once it shrinks in size, the anticipatory expression or the anticipation goes away. That means a person who is old has seen everything that has to happen, and also structurally his or her hippocampus has shrunken in size. That means even though something good is going to happen, they don't feel good about it, or they don't feel as good as about as the kid or the middle-aged people will feel. So this is the cycle. Okay, anticipation. Next, this anticipation is forwarded, or this kind of anticipatory feeling is forwarded to the important part, that is the ventral tegmental area of the cerebrum. Okay, cerebellum. So this ventral tegmental area gives some kind of reinforcement. Okay, it may be a positive effect or a negative effect. Okay, if you are going through some kind of detachment, or if you are not getting that kind of pleasure by actually getting into that event, then you will not feel good about it. So this particular thing, again, this kind of processing is taking place in the amygdala. That means once the events actually occurs, then the amygdala will try to assess whether that event was as good as the anticipation was there or not. This comparison will basically give either a positive reinforcement or a negative reinforcement. If the anticipation and the actual event matches, then it is a positive reinforcement. This will go into the hippocampus again for some kind of memory reinforcement. But it is the amygdala which will process this particular event to be good or bad. So this is the cycle of addiction. This addiction may be towards anything. It may be towards any person, towards food, towards some kind of drugs. The basic central dogma is the same. Okay, some important placards are here, like what happens if positive association is there, what happens if negative association is there. If you are repeating the event, a pleasurable event on and on, then the brain changes its neuronal structure. That means they will rearrange itself. This type of phenomena is known as plasticity. Plasticity means it's a remodulation of the neurons of the brain. The neurons of the brain will basically become or restructure itself. So this particular word or this particular term is known as plasticity. Okay, sometimes new neurons will also grow. This particular phenomena is known as neurogenesis. Okay, all these things occur in the presence of NMDA receptors. What is NMDA receptors? I'll tell you later on. Okay, these are basically calcium channel receptors. These are the receptors which are helpful for upregulation and downregulation of the calcium receptors in the brain. We know that calcium is excitatory in nature. If more number of calcium receptors are expressed in the brain, then the brain will fire even with less amount of stimulus. Repeated amount of calcium influx into the brain areas will basically cause an overexpression or an overstimulation under small stimulation. That means the stimulus may be less, but the impact of the stimulus will be more. This is known as excitation. And negative excitation means if there is down regulation of the calcium receptors, then even if the threshold is more, still the output will be less because there is less number of calcium receptors to begin with. Less number of calcium, which is excitatory in nature, is inflowing to the brain. All these things I'll tell you later on, but just know that NMDA receptors are responsible for upregulation or downregulation of the calcium receptors in various areas of the brain. And this can bring about two kind of changes. One is plasticity, that is the remodulation of the brain. Next is neurogenesis, which is the growth of new neurons. So amplification goes when there is plasticity and neurogenesis. Withdrawal symptoms, like if you are not getting this kind of stimulus, or if you are not getting good feedback to the brain, then the brain can undergo some kind of withdrawal symptoms like dysphoria, anxiety, anxiousness, and all these things can occur. Okay, then what happens, there is a decrease in the serotonin level in the brain. Serotonin, this particular neurotransmitter in the brain, is responsible for increasing or decreasing the blood flow. If there is less amount of blood flow, less amount of neurons will come, and then the brain will become anoxic. There will be less amount of transportation in the brain, and the brain functions ceases, and then there is a sort of deprivation in the brain. This causes all the classical neuronal symptoms which are related to withdrawal symptoms. All these things we'll discuss on later on, but just know that this is also one of the function of the brain. Okay, so let us just review. First is olfaction, next is the emotional balance, next the function of this limbic system is the formation of the intellectual complex or the intelligence per se. Okay, so what is intelligence? So this was my thesis topic. If I start speaking on intelligence, then it will take maybe many months. Okay, because like I'm well aware of this thing and I have a personal fondness towards this thing, but I'll just try to tell you this thing in very short way. Intelligence there are of two types. One is fluid and one is crystallized. Fluid intelligence means this is a kind of intelligence which is novel in nature. Okay, that means the kind of intelligence which we use to solve a novel kind of problem. That means the new kind of problem. Whenever a new kind of problem comes in our life, the kind of intelligence that we use for solving that kind of novel problem is known as fluid. F-L-U-I-D, fluid. Okay, and then if a known kind of problem comes, if you know that problem, or if you can anticipate that problem, and if you can use the previous knowledge, that is known as crystallized intelligence. So these are the two kinds of intelligence we have. Let us discuss how the limbic system is basically involved in the formation of the intelligence. I'll tell you in very shortly. Let us discuss only the hippocampus here, because we'll not go into too many topics here. Hippocampus with respect to the limbic system is important because this particular part of this limbic system is important for formation of memories. Memories per se is important for formation of crystallized intelligence, or the crystallized form of intelligence, that is solving the problem which is not novel in nature but a repetition of a previous kind of problem. In examinations, we are teaching you so many things. We are teaching you some kind of subject matter, and then we are testing the knowledge of you by giving you or writing an examination. This examination is only important for testing the crystallized intelligence, not the fluid intelligence. That means a farmer who is farming in the field may be more intelligent than us, because he is trying to solve some kind of novel problems which are not there in the textbook, or which are not found in the some digital libraries or some kind of actual libraries. These are very new kind of problem, and they can solve better than us. So just getting a degree does not mean that we are intelligent. Getting a degree means we have some kind of formative crystallized intelligence. Okay, those people who do not go to colleges, or those people who do not go to some schools or colleges, or do not have professional degrees or any degrees for that matter, are maybe equally intelligent or more intelligent than those who get degrees or those who have hold designations. Okay, so never think that just because we are holding degrees, or just because we have some kind of designation, we are more intelligent than those people who do not go to colleges or school. Because there is a whole another area of intelligence that is known as fluid intelligence, that is nothing to do with the books or the degrees. Hippocampus per se is important for understanding the crystallized intelligence, or the crystallized part of the intelligence. Again, this has something to do with the memory system. That means, what is memory? Memory means it's a collection of the past events. Okay, it's a collection of past events, and it has this kind of this particular thing, or the memory per se is divided into two systems of the brain. One is known as declarative and another is known as non-declarative. Okay, what is declarative, what is non-declarative? Let me tell you just briefly. That means those events which are basically episodic in nature, that means those events which are coming in a sequence, or those events which are basically a repetition of the past, are known as the episodic events or the semantic events. Like those events which are related to a similar logic. If there is a logic in the memory, that is known as declarative. If there is no logic in that memory, that is known as implicit or non-declarative. That means you do not know why you remember that thing, but you still remember that thing. Sometimes sometimes you're trying to remember something, right? You're trying to remember like something which does not make sense, and it becomes very hard to remember those things because you can't find any logic. When you can find logic, it becomes very simple for us to remember that thing. Or if it is emotionally triggered, it becomes very easier for us to remember, because we have been trained to use the declarative memory more and more. What about the non-declarative memory? The memory which does not have any logic. This is known as implicit memory or non-declarative memory. Okay, these memories are also subdivided into further types. One is the procedural memory, another is known as classical conditioning or the operant conditioning, and that is known as non-necessitative. These are the various terms we'll discuss on later on, not the idea of today's class. Today's class was supposed to tell you that limbic system is important with respect to formation of memories and with respect to higher functions like intelligence. One word that you're supposed to remember from this thing is the hippocampus. Hippocampus is basically important for formation of long-term non-declarative memories. That means hippocampus can give some kind of judgment to the memory which does not make sense to us. Okay, so let us see how it occurs. Okay, just know that we have short-term memory, we have long-term memory, and we have remote memory. What is short-term? What qualifies to be a short-term memory? Those memories which are less than a minute. Okay, less than a minute to 2-3 minutes or 5 minutes. Suppose you are supposed to dial a number. Okay, you are supposed to call someone tells you a 10-digit number. You can remember the 10-digit number for maybe 1 or 2 minutes or 3 minutes or maximum 5 minutes. once you dial that number, and then you tend to forget that number. This kind of memory, unless it is that number is important to us, will not tend to remember everyone's number. So this type of memory is known as short-term memory, which is lasting for minutes. Those memories which we think are important for us, we tend to remember for longer time by repetitions and rehearsal. This type of memory is known as long-term memory, which lasts for days to months. Okay, subject to repetition and rehearsal. And what is remote memory? Those memories which can translate or which we can recall even after a duration greater than 6 months. This type of memories are known as remote memories. Like, we tend to remember things from our childhood, we tend to remember things, or maybe a class which I have taught you maybe 6 months back. So this type of memories are known as remote memories. What is the next function of the limbic system? The next function of the limbic system is regulation of appetite and the eating behavior. So we know that amygdala gives the emotional content to any particular thing. Suppose we have a food, we supposed to take one food. The food has a pleasant smell or a appealing smell. Then the amygdaloid complex will basically process that thing to be a positive thing or to a good thing. This will be positively reinforced. So amygdala, with this particular regard, basically is important for deciding our food choice, our emotional modulation of the food intake, while the ventromedial nucleus of the hypothalamus and the lateral hypothalamic nuclei will regulate the food intake. That means the emotional part of that food intake is handled by the amygdala, while whether you take that food or will not take that food will be decided by the hypothalamus. Two parts in the hypothalamus. The lateral part is important for basically giving you hunger cramps or the hunger trigger, while the ventromedial nucleus, that is the nucleus which is in between, will basically tell you to stop eating. That means it will give you act like a satiation center or a satiety center. Okay, how to remember this particular two nuclei? Most of the times it is very confusing. Just know that there is a medial nuclei. Okay, there is a middle part. This is the, suppose this is the ventromedial nuclei. Okay, this is a ventromedial nuclei which is in the middle, and then there is a, you can see this thing, this is a ventromedial nuclei. These two are the lateral nuclei. The red and the black pen are the lateral nuclei. Okay, you can think the lateral nuclei, two lateral nuclei, as limbs. Okay, and the mouth is in the middle. The peripheral parts or the two limbs are supposed to bring the food inside or into the middle. So the ventromedial nuclei is the satiety, while the peripheral part, that is the lateral nuclei, are for the hunger. That means these two nuclei will bring in food. This nuclei will ask you to stop eating. So this is the trick to remember which nuclei does what. Three nuclei with respect to eating and appetite. Amygdaloid nuclei or the amygdaloid complex is important for food choice and the emotional modulation with respect to food, while the ventromedial nuclei and the lateral hypothalamic nuclei will basically decide the satiety and the hunger cramps. Next is regulation of the endocrine glands and the functioning of the autonomic nervous system. This we have discussed before, and we have discussed with respect to hypothalamus how the hypothalamus is regulating the autonomic nervous system. Just know that whatever you have read there, the same thing will apply here. Only difference is that we are taking the hypothalamus as a part of the limbic system, because hypothalamus is an integral part of the limbic system. Okay, so you are supposed to remember this thing. So hypothalamus falls under the subthalamic nucleus or the subcortical structures of the limbic system. So hypothalamus being an integral part of the limbic system, whatever the function of the hypothalamus will automatically translate into the functions of the limbic system. Okay, so it is something to do with the flight and the fight response, which I have already told you. How this occurs, this is well nicely given in the chart. Please go to the chart, it is already given here. Basically you can see that the circadian rhythm generator, that is the suprachiasmatic nucleus, tells you to wake up during the day. Okay, those animals which are basically diurnal in duration, or the diurnal type animals, these animals have a predisposition to be awake during the daytime. So the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the posterior retinal part, this will ask the brain to be awake during the day part. It will search for food, take food, and again fall back to sleep in the night time. So this is a whole pattern. You can just look at the pattern. Don't go too deep into this slide, not required for you. This for your understanding only. So moving on to the next slide, I'll just discuss another slide and I'll let you go. This is a very important question. This is regarding the circuitry, how the circuits are formed in the limbic system. The most important circuit that we are supposed to remember with respect to limbic system is the Papes Circuit, P-A-P-E-Z, Papes Circuit of the limbic system. That is, this is how the interconnection, how the various nuclei of the limbic systems are interconnected, how they are functioning together as a pack. We are supposed to know this fact. So to understand this thing, one very important scientist who has contributed a lot in understanding emotions and understanding the limbic system in general was James Papes. James Papes was the one who discussed, or who basically found out how the limbic system is interconnected and interlooped. He was basically trying to find these connections from long before, but he does not have any particular way to find out the connection. So he devised one method. He studied one method by looking the progression of the rabies virus. We know that rabies virus is a neurogenic virus. That means it basically infects the nervous system. It has a predilection towards nervous system. The rabies virus, the virus can be stained. That means the virus, whenever the virus is affecting one particular neuron, it can be stained easily. Okay. So what he did, he cleverly injected rabies virus in one particular part of the limbic system, and then he traced the pathway how the virus is progressing. Those neurons which are interconnected and bundled together, the virus will progress in the line of those neurons. So by following the infectivity pattern of that virus, he also found out what is the connection of the neuron. So this is how he was thinking. See, so intelligent, like so novel. That's why he got Nobel Prize also, because he used the virus to track or to find out the pathway of the limbic system. Okay, anyways, that was the history. But let us discuss what are the parts of the Papes circuit, what are the important structures with respect to the Papes circuit. So the Papes circuit, basically there are two models. One is a primitive model and another is an advanced model. In the primitive model, it was basically formed by the hippocampus, hypothalamus, anterior nucleus of thalamus, and cingulate gyrus. These were the four important parts. These were the four important parts of the Papes circuit. Okay. So here you can see hippocampus, starting from the cingulate gyrus. Cingulate gyrus is sending its efferent neurons to the hippocampus, and the hippocampus sends its neurons to the hypothalamus. And in the ascending limb, that means the limb which is going up towards the cortex, the hypothalamus will give efferent nucleus to the anterior nuclei of the thalamus, and from the thalamus it will go back to the cingulate gyrus, which is found in the brain. So this is a closed loop. This loop runs in a particular fashion. This was the classical Papes circuit. So four structures, if you have to remember at all from the limbic system, you are supposed to remember the cingulate cortex, hippocampus, hypothalamus, and the anterior nucleus of thalamus. Okay, so you are supposed to draw this diagram. This circuit is very much important in functioning of the limbic system, and more particularly important for processing the memory process. Okay, we can understand the memory circuit by studying this particular circuit. Once this circuit was discovered, then the people found out that there is another part of the limbic system, which is very much integrally involved in the circuit, that was the amygdala. So they have added one addition in this classical circuit, that is the amygdala. So in the extended circuit or the revised circuit, they include amygdala. Amygdala forms a connection between the hippocampus and the hypothalamus. So this is where the amygdala is easily placed or easily inserted into the circuit. The primary circuit will always run, which is running from the hippocampus to hypothalamus to the thalamus to the cingulate gyrus. Okay, this is the primary circuit. But amygdala is the part of the circuit which is giving some kind of emotional color into the cells. So amygdala is running a loop between the hypothalamus and the hippocampus. This is an interconnected loop, which is a secondary loop which runs on the primary loop. Primary loop is formed by the hippocampus, hypothalamus, thalamus and the cingulate cortex or the cingulate gyrus. Secondary loop runs between the hippocampus, amygdala and hypothalamus. This is secondary loop. So now when you are discussing Papes circuit, you have to write the classical Papes circuit consists of hippocampus, hypothalamus, anterior nucleus of thalamus and the cingulate gyrus. And the extended Papes circuit consists of an additional loop, that is the amygdala, which runs from the hippocampus to the hypothalamus and back. So this is how you're supposed to write when you're asked the question regarding the Papes circuit. Okay. So some emotional behaviors have been described here. So this is just a roundabout of the limbic system you're supposed to know. Please go through the slides. If any discussion is there or if any valid point is there, please ask in the tutorial group. The tutorial group is hardly utilized. It is not utilized properly. If any doubts or if you want to understand which topics are important for you for examination point of view, feel free to ask in the tutorial group. Okay, that is the purpose of the tutorial group. So with this thing, I'll try to summarize the class. Take care. Stay safe. Okay. Okay. Have a good day.
Yes, sir.